On July 16, 1945, the first atomic bomb worked, but not here. In this desert, dawn curls weakly. The tower shivers. The device coughs and dies. The flash is a pale bruise that doesn't burn, a puff of dust trembling back to earth. Men in goggles stare into a silence that keeps going. You feel it too, don't you? The moment a promised ending slips through the fingers and all the roads ahead rearrange. If the fuse wouldn't light, whose father comes home? Whose city survives? Whose map redraws your family's life? Stay with me. And for more living what-if history, subscribe so you never miss the next turn. A transatlantic swell lifts a gray ship toward Europe, and in a small cabin, the new president, Harry Truman, opens his pocket diary. He has been told to expect a message from New Mexico, something final, something that would simplify terrible choices. The cabin fan ticks. A telephone line hisses like a snake behind a wall. When the voice comes, it is General Leslie Groves, measured, dry, trying to sand down panic with engineering. The test did not prove what it needed to prove. No blast of sun, no irrefutable new grammar of war. Through the static, J. Robert Oppenheimer says almost nothing. It is the silence of a man who has rehearsed triumph and now discovers there is only a corridor of doubt. The ship plows on. Tomorrow, July 17th, the Potsdam Conference opens. Behind the title, Truman, Churchill, Stalin, soon Attlee, there are pages and pages of verbs: demand, dismantle, occupy, punish, assist, end. Without the bomb, the verbs grow sharper, heavier. The draft of a declaration to Japan, due July 26th, waits in a leather folder. Its spine is unconditional surrender. Its hazard is pride and the imperial institution, the kokutai. Words can win and words can wound. And now they might have to replace fire. Across the Pacific, a sailor on a destroyer counts not days but letters, each one a promise that the ocean is finite. He has a calendar with November circled and a pencil note, Operation Olympic. Maybe it ends there. He writes home anyway. Keep the baby warm. Don't worry about me. In Osaka, a mother boils bitter greens and waters down the rice, then waters it again. She tells her son the taste isn't the taste of defeat, but of waiting. In a Quonset hut on Tinian, a pilot spreads a map like a quilt of wounds, tracing blackened neighborhoods where Tokyo burned in March, thinking about roots that keep him alive, about the smell of his gloves after a raid. In Washington, before the voyage, the interim committee had argued the old question: demonstrate or use. Show the world the power on an empty island, or end the war with a shock that would not be forgotten. Now the demonstration has failed, and the absence of light is itself a sign. Henry Stimson's hands remember paper, memos written in careful moral ink. James Byrnes sharpens his sentences on politics the way a chef learns a knife. They are not villains. They are custodians of the narrowing corridor. Truman steps ashore, passes through the ruins near Berlin, and the road to Potsdam is studded with broken bricks, open windows like sockets. The meeting rooms smell of starch and ink. Churchill is still in the chair, though an election will soon dislodge him for Clement Attlee. Stalin arrives with the patience of a glacier. When Truman sits, he sits with the message lodged under his ribs. The device did not sing, and so the chorus of strategy must change its key. That night he reads a briefing on plans named like storms: Olympic for Kyushu by November, Coronet for Honshu in the new year. And the pages do not list the number of boys who will not come home. They only whisper ranges, orders of magnitude, all the ways a country can be torn and still keep moving. He rubs his temple and sees, for a moment, the boy who ran the haberdashery before history walked through the door and asked him to sign his name. You and I sit at his shoulder while the Potsdam Declaration is drafted. July presses its thumb to the page, and the sentence unconditional surrender refuses to loosen. Somewhere, a clerk draws a thin line through adjectives that promise too much mercy or too little. Somewhere else, a translator tests how kokutai bends in English. In Tokyo, the Supreme War Council, Suzuki, Togo, Anami, others, keep their own counsel and their own quarrels. The emperor listens like a mirror that records and does not decide, at least not yet. The palace walls hear the moth-soft flutter of ration cards and the distant thud of another night raid. The Pacific is a machine of shortage now. the naval blockade tightens, the nets of hunger pull at villages. The sky is a rumor of B-29s. In August, the Soviets are due to enter the war against Japan, a thunder that has not yet sounded. Without a mushroom cloud to end arguments, perhaps that thunder will be the sound that breaks them. But that is still a page ahead. Here, in this room, it is only July, and a man has to choose whether clarity is surrender or strategy. He looks up. Stimson speaks softly about the usefulness of mercy when it is precise. Byrnes leans forward with the weight of domestic winds and foreign weathers. Groves offers logistics. Oppenheimer's eyes stick to the table's grain. The president asks the kind of question you ask when all the arithmetic is grief. If we change one word, does the war end sooner? If we permit a symbol to stand under Allied command, does it save a winter of funerals? What would you do, with the folder open and the train of days running out? A messenger enters with a typed sheet still faintly warm from the machine. A sentence is underlined, and where there was iron, there is now iron shaped like a key. The paper rustles, and you can hear the breath of everyone in the room catch as if a match has just struck. The line lands on Truman's desk. What if we change one sentence about the Emperor? Then the room listens to the weight of a comma. The comma does not look like much. It sits there, a speck of gravity, and the men around the table orbit it because language is suddenly the only weapon that doesn't scorch. Stimson's voice drifts first, the kind that folds rather than cuts. He remembers the memos, the arguments about demonstration and use, and now the demonstration has failed, so the argument flips like a coin showing the other face. The American people, he says, will accept a peace that is hard without being vindictive. The Japanese, he says, will hear a door unlock if they can keep a figurehead under Allied command. He does not say mercy is weakness. He says mercy is leverage, as speed, as fewer telegrams to mothers. Byrnes hears votes behind every verb. He has tallied what can be promised at home and what cannot. Unconditional surrender, he says, is not a public slogan you downshift without cost. There are headlines tuned like tripwires, and across the river of time, there will be books that accuse or absolve. He wants the end, but he wants the credit arranged so it cannot be stolen. He flicks a glance at the map of the Pacific on the wall, those small islands that once meant nothing, and now mean dead suns if you choose the wrong sentence. The menu of force is sober and ugly. Intensify the blockade until the nation starves or surrenders. Continue the firestorms that blew through Tokyo in March and left the city a charcoal drawing under a cold sky. Accelerate Olympic the invasion of Kyushu by November, then Coronet for Honshu. In a new year, no one wants to meet on a beach. The generals come in with voices that don't tremble, but make your bones hum. They say ranges, not numbers. They say beachheads and ridgelines, weather windows and typhoon seasons. The stubborn math of a defensive home ground. At Potsdam, the carpet smells of dust and old cigarettes. Truman meets Churchill in the early days of the conference. The Englishman built like an ellipsis, his sentences carrying the thunder of a war he talked the world through. But on July 26th, the British elections roll in like a tide pulling a chair out from under the man sitting in it. Clement Attlee arrives, quiet as a hinge, and the table must learn a new rhythm. Across from them, Stalin attends with a patience that looks like kindness until you stand near it and feel the cold. He signals, not with flourish but with inevitability, that the Soviet armies will turn against Japan when they are ready. The Far East is a room he intends to enter. Back at the American billets, the interim committee's notes flutter like exhausted birds. Once they debated, do we show the weapon on an empty shore, let the world see and recoil, or do we use it to force an end that cannot be talked around? Now, the desert has refused to burn, and a demonstration would be worse than nothing. The absence of light has become its own instruction. Do not bluff with physics. The committee's logic inverts, and what remains is grammar. If you cannot shock a nation into peace, can you write it there? Truman is not a philosopher. He is a man who sold hats and now signs orders that move oceans. He hears Stimson describe the Emperor as a bridge you walk across, not a throne you kneel to. He hears Byrnes argue that any hint of leniency will be read as surrender of will. He hears Groves offering timelines for another attempt at a test, eyes on calendars that do not care if 1 million households are counting with them. He hears Oppenheimer murmur something about failure modes and the stubbornness of neutrons, a scientist's way of being ashamed and precise at once. You feel the room lean when the conversation touches the word unconditional. It is the banner under which the war was sold, the mast of a ship now creaking in a different weather. Does a single clarified clause, retaining the emperor as a symbol under Allied authority, betray the dead or honor them by hastening the peace the living need? If you were the one with the pen, would you risk that line, knowing every draft becomes a ledger of souls? On July 26th, the Declaration is due. The typewriters clack. The words are stern, and they promise justice and rebirth under occupation. And they say nothing explicit about the throne. Churchill is gone, Attlee is seated, and the British signature does not change because ink is lighter than a bayonet. Stalin reads with an unreadable mouth and thinks about rail lines east. In the American draft room, a single sentence stares back like a locked door. The kokutai is not named. The door stays closed. By evening, the air has turned metallic. A storm gathers somewhere beyond the linden trees. Truman walks a short corridor alone and presses his fingertips to the cool plaster, listening to the silence that follows a day at war with words. He thinks of a farmer's field near Independence, the smell of rain on dust, the way a harvest is a bargain between patience and weather. He comes back to the table and asks for the cable drafts to neutral capitals, Bern, Stockholm, perhaps Lisbon, to be amended in ways the newspapers will never see. He wants language that can be conveyed without ceremony. The emperor may continue as a constitutional symbol under the authority of the supreme commander of the Allied powers. Immediate cessation will yield immediate relief, disarmament, and a path that avoids the sackcloth of invasion. Byrnes winces but does not slam the folder. Stimson's eyes close for the length of a breath, a kind of prayer without a god. The clerks begin again. Somewhere in the night, a teleprinter starts to whisper. Truman does not announce anything. He authorizes a shadow, a conditional clarity that keeps a door ajar while the public declaration holds its iron face. The storm breaks, soft rain ticking at the window panes, and the first copy of the cable curls out like a ribbon on the desk. It is headed for rooms where diplomats will read between the lines. It is headed for Tokyo by way of neutrality. It is headed for a decision no bomb can make for them. The room is too warm for August, and the fans only push hot air around like blame. Beneath the palace, in a chamber lined with paper screens and hard chairs, the Supreme War Council gathers. Suzuki Kantaro with his tired eyelids. Togo Shigenori with the careful hands of a man who has folded too many secrets. War Minister Anami Korichika sitting straight as a spear. They listen to each other with the politeness of knives wrapped in cloth. Above them, far away, the sky mutters with distant airplanes, the memory of raids thudding against the ribs of the city even when the sirens are quiet. On the table lie ration cards creased thin from being shown and shown again. A map with threadbare edges, and a list of calories that keeps shrinking like a shoreline at low tide. Someone has brought tea that tastes of boiled rope. Reports say the naval blockade tightens, that rice comes in trickles, that mothers make soup from the water that cook the soup. Anami's jaw clenches. He speaks of homeland defense, of Kitsugo, of the island's geography turning into 1,000 small fortresses where men can die standing. He does not speak of children fainting in queues. He does not need to. The paper knows. Suzuki clears his throat, a dry sound that slows the room. He remembers the other war, the way surrender is a word that grows teeth if you say it too early. He says their enemies demand unconditional surrender. He says that word unconditional like a stone dropped down a well whose bottom he cannot hear. Togo looks at the floor for the length of a breath and then raises his eyes. He has felt a low frequency humming through the neutral channels, a suggestion in the static. He mentions Bern, whispers Sweden. It is not a promise, he says, only the contour of one. The Americans may accept an end that preserves the emperor as a symbol under Allied authority, coupled to disarmament and an occupation they will not call a sack. Food relief is part of the shape. The word kokutai floats between them like a lantern no one wants to touch. Anami's hand moves to the table as if to steady the map. He speaks of honor as a quantity you can count, of warriors waiting in the hills with nothing left to lose, of the shame of letting foreigners dictate the terms of a throne. He imagines beaches running red and thinks that is preferable to a world where the sword is taken from their hands by men who do not understand what the steel has meant. Togo shakes his head once. He speaks not of honor's beauty, but of its cost when it becomes blind. He describes the empty lots where houses used to be, the markets where barter has replaced coin, the letters from cities that say nothing because there is nothing to say. The emperor arrives softly, more like a climate than a person, and the room tilts toward him without moving. He sits, eyes lowered, voice light as ash. He asks, not commands. He asks how much longer the people can be asked to carry the fire in their stomachs. He asks whether the army can promise victory or only difficulty. He asks what will remain of the kokutai if the kokutai becomes a flag draped over a graveyard. Do you feel the question pressing on your own tongue, the one that transforms pride into arithmetic? 2 days later, the air changes like a door opening into winter. It is the night of August 8th turning into the morning of the 9th when the Soviet Union declares war and pours into Manchuria. The telegrams arrive like hail on the palace roof. Names of towns you have to stab at on a map, Halar, Harbin, Mukden, are joined by arrows that move too fast to draw. The Kwantung Army, once an iron name, gives way like rusted wire. Without a mushroom cloud to end arguments, this is the thunder that shakes the nails from the beams. The council convenes again, and the fans seem louder, as if embarrassed by their own weakness. Anami's eyes are red at the edges. He has not slept. He says the blow in Manchuria changes nothing essential. Japan still has the home islands, 1 million men who know the folds of their own valleys, a cause worth the burning. He sketches defenses with his index finger on the lacquered table, and for a second his finger trembles. A tiny earthquake that passes before anyone can name it. Togo lays out the other map, the one that includes hunger and winter, and the way an empire becomes a ward when two giants decide where the lines go. He speaks of Korea, of the North and the South, becoming clocks set to different times if the war staggers on. He does not say Hokkaido. He does not need to. The unspoken sits in the corners like a shadow that won't leave at noon. A cable from a neutral capital arrives with language that is neither confirmation nor denial, only a statement of what might be possible if the emperor remains as a constitutional figure beneath an allied commander and if disarmament begins at once. The words are modest and careful: relief shipments, medical supplies, repatriation in stages. They promise nothing in ink-black letters, but between the lines there is a faint warmth, like a hand held out through a curtain. In the bunker, the lights buzz and the men talk in circles that grow smaller until they overlap. The emperor listens without blinking, and a single thought ripens behind his face. A country can live with a humiliated symbol if the people can eat. A country cannot eat words carved into rock. He asks to hear again how many ships could be allowed through, how the occupation would supervise rather than erase, how quickly radios could be used for a message that would not be a scream. Outside, Tokyo breathes through its teeth. A woman hangs laundry across a courtyard where part of a wall is missing. She pins a white shirt, and it flutters like a surrender flag she refuses to name. A boy runs a hand along the curved spine of a burned beam, as if it were a whale beached in the city. A shopkeeper counts cigarettes like currency, listens to the rumor that the Soviets have come, and decides to save one for the day the rumor turns into a knock. That night, in a smaller room with fewer chairs, the emperor asks for a draft of words he might speak if the path is chosen. He does not call it surrender. He does not call it anything, not yet. He touches the paper as if heat rises from it. Kato looks at him the way a man looks at a bridge he hopes will hold. Togo bows, a motion that carries both relief and risk. Anami's mouth is a thin line, and he stares at the floor to hide the storm behind his eyes. When the meeting ends, no one says the decision has been made. They only stand and feel gravity shift by a degree, almost imperceptible unless you are the one carrying a city on your back. In the corridor, a guard hears something like wind and realizes it is only his own breath returning to him. The emperor pauses at the threshold, and there, in that fraction of a second, his resolve tilts, just enough to send a crack through the wall the hardliners have been leaning against. The new sentence grows in the dark like a seed. It begins as a private clause threaded through back channels, then is tested against the iron of public words. Stimson holds it up to the window and watches the light go through. The Emperor may remain as a symbol under Allied authority. Byrnes weighs it as if it might explode in his hands. The draftsmen flex their fingers and coax the syntax so it neither kneels nor sneers. Truman nods once, the kind of nod that spends political capital like coin and expects change in lives saved. Across town at Potsdam, the table holds steady with Attlee now in Churchill's chair, and Stalin reading without giving away heat. The formal declaration will not trumpet mercy. It will keep its jaw set. But the cables moving beneath the floorboards carry a different temperature. They speak of immediate ceasefire upon acceptance, of disarmament under a single Allied commander whose title is long and heavy, of an occupation that supervises rather than erases. They name prosecutions for the architects of aggression. They promise food ships like white birds if the ports are opened and guarded. They sketch repatriation by stages so men can walk home in order instead of drifting like wreckage. Groves comes with new calendars and talks about a second attempt in New Mexico, about refinements and contingencies and the stubbornness of matter. Oppenheimer answers in sentences that keep their eyes on the floor. Time is a blade against both of them. The Soviets are already in Manchuria, and the weather on Kyushu keeps its own appointments. Truman chooses the instrument he has in his hands now, language that can end a war if pride can bend. In the Pacific, the blockade tightens until maps look like fists. Submarines lie quiet where they need to lie and close their circle. Yet over certain cities the night falls without the red blossom of incendiaries. It is not mercy so much as signaling, a pause written in fire's absence. Pamphlets come instead, more than paper, less than promise. They drift down at dawn and noon and dusk, thin leaves that tell a hard truth, and then, in a single line set apart, suggest a door. The Emperor may remain, the nation may live, lay down the sword, and the mouth will be fed. In farm fields, men put their caps back on and read aloud. In alleys, children catch the papers as if chasing birds, then bring them to mothers who flatten them with careful hands and find the sentence circled in deep ink. On Kyushu, engineers and soldiers pile timber and sandbags and wire. A young officer traces the defensive belts with a twig, speaking softly to a platoon that listens like a church does when the candles are out. He has heard that the raids have paused over another city and cannot make sense of it. He tells his men that the enemy is tricking them. He tells himself that the islands are stone. He does not tell anyone he dreams of a ship coming into harbor with sacks of rice stacked like unlit lanterns. In Tokyo, Togo walks the corridor with a cable folded tight enough to leave an impressed line in his palm. The neutral message is cautious, but caution can be a bridge if you step where the planks are. He meets Kido, who meets the Emperor, who hears the terms again, with the stillness of a lake before an oar touches it. Disarmament under a single commander, retention of the throne as symbol, trials for those whose orders stained whole maps, food and medicine, not as charity, but as part of surrender's mechanics, repatriation that names the years as if naming could shorten them. Ennami stands like a pillar and speaks against it. He sees in the words not rescue, but humiliation written in small print. He says the sword cannot be handed to foreigners without cutting the soul that wields it. He is not wrong about the sharpness. He is wrong about what must bleed. Suzuki counts days as a man counts coins when the shop is closing. He says they have reached the point where endurance becomes vanity. He says the Emperor's body is not a shield for despair. Outside the palace, leaflets catch on the black ribs of burned houses. A seamstress unpicks a kimono to make a shirt and hums under her breath. In a school without windows, a teacher writes the new sentence on a slate and asks the children what it means. They do not know the word constitutional. They know the word hunger. They know the words go home. Stimson wires an outline of terms that reads like a skeleton with organs drawn in pencil. Immediate ceasefire. All arms stacked and counted under the Allied commander's eye. The Emperor retained as symbol by the will of the people and the consent of the Allies. Militarist leaders to be tried, police powers trimmed, speech and press loosened by increments, ships with grain and medicine to berth under guard, factories to turn from weapons to shovels with foreign overseers counting bolts, soldiers to be demobilized in columns that move toward farms instead of cliffs. Byrnes edits with a pen that hesitates where voters might later point. Truman initials the page and feels the weight move from words toward consequences. The pamphlets change tone. There is a new clarity nested in the hard shell. Surrender now, and this sentence becomes a bridge. Refuse, and the sea tightens, and the winter grows teeth. In a radio office, a young linguist rephrases the line so it cannot be mistaken. So the kokutai is named without pretending it will remain untouched. He drinks cold tea and does not notice when the sky turns from blue to a color without a name. At the national broadcaster, a corridor is cleared, and a microphone is tested with a whisper. Engineers argue over acetate discs and the thickness of wax, over the risk of one cut against another, over where to hide the masters when they are done. A script is drafted in a prose so formal it sounds like wind inside a bell. It will be voiced in a cadence the country has never heard from that mouth. It will say the war has taken everything words can take, and now words must give something back. The army keeps its own counsel in rooms where maps lie like old skins. There are officers who will never accept the sentence, who would rather gamble a nation than bend a symbol. Their footsteps multiply in corridors you cannot see. In a studio lit like dusk, a technician lowers a needle and touches the turning center with 2 fingers, as if to steady a heartbeat. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door opens and closes without hurry, and the men near the microphone look up, listening to the echo to learn how much time they have. The night before the voice goes out, the city holds its breath like a swimmer under black water. In the palace, corridors smell of lacquer and damp paper. Footsteps slide and stop. There are men who will not accept the sentence, boots that want to kick the door shut before words can cross the threshold. In a studio lit low, engineers handle the acetate discs as if holding the ribs of a small animal. The script lies open, grave and formal, each character weighed to carry a nation without breaking it. Someone hides a duplicate beneath folded cloth in a basket, because history sometimes survives inside small, ordinary things. Dawn slides into August, with a light too thin for triumph. The broadcast begins at noon. Radios crackle in barracks and kitchens, in tunnels and offices with broken windows propped by books. The voice that arrives is higher than many expect, distant and woven with static, but the meaning lands like rain on a roof after a long thirst. He speaks of a situation that cannot be improved by continuing war, of saving lives, of preserving the core of the nation by yielding the sword. He does not say the word surrender. He says, endure. He says, bear what cannot be borne so that the children can eat. In alleys and courtyards, people lower their heads without agreeing on why the tears have come. On a destroyer in the Western Pacific, a sailor feels the ship take a different kind of role as the engines idle down. He puts his hand to the bulkhead and thinks about the dress his wife will have chosen by now, for a child she has only described in ink. On Tinian, a pilot who has traced scars across maps sits on the edge of his cot, palms open, and lets the idea of not flying again settle into him like sleep. In Osaka, the mother who watered rice until it became memory spoons steamed to her son's lips and thanks a sentence for tasting like food. In Washington, the president reads a prepared line and then looks up as if seeing a window open. The note about the emperor stays exactly where the private cables said it would. The throne remains a symbol under Allied authority. Sovereignty now, a careful architecture of occupation and reform. The American general named Supreme Commander steps onto a runway weeks later with a pipe that becomes an emblem in photographs. But in this moment, he is only a man walking toward a task, measured not in miles, but in habits. The orders are precise: disarm, feed, rebuild, prosecute architects of aggression, loosen fists without breaking bones. The Soviets, having torn through Manchuria, stand on coasts and railheads with victory still in their boots. They push to the Kurils, reach for the last pieces of a broken map, and look across water toward Hokkaido, but find fewer arguments to cross it now that the enemy's radios have said the words that close a war. In Korea, the line drawn across a waste of land hardens from a pencil into a rule, one half clocked to one capital, the other to another. It is not mercy. It is not doom. It is the beginning of something that will cost its own decades. On Kyushu, the trenches breathe out. Timber bleaches, wire slackens. Tunnels hold cool air that will never be breathed by men waiting to die in them. Boys who were meant to be burned into the beaches walk instead in columns toward depots where rifles become metal counted and stacked. A sergeant takes off his belt and folds it slowly, not knowing where to put the discipline he wore like a second skin. A school reopens with no glass in the frames and chalk dust on the teacher's fingers, and a child raises a hand to ask why the Emperor's voice sounded far away. Ships appear like white punctuation on the horizon and come into port under watch. Grain sacks are carried down gangways by sailors who never pictured being thanked by grandmothers. Nurses line up vaccines in rooms that used to echo with orders. Police learn a new posture. Printers set type in words that have not run in the open for years. Trials begin, and the names that were once said with banners attached are said with charges instead. The Emperor rides through streets where people bow out of reflex and curiosity and relief. He remains not because he is untouchable, but because a shattered country needs a face that is not a foreign face while it learns how to stand. You and I walk a narrow lane at dusk, where laundry crosses like prayer flags, and the smell of rice is almost a religion. We pass a shopkeeper who counts cigarettes as if they were coins of time. We hear a radio carry a list of stations now on the air again. And we listen as a woman reads a letter from a soldier who will be home by New Year if trains and luck hold. Relief is not clean. Grief threads it, names that will never answer the door woven into every smile. But there are small absolutions. A bowl refilled, a roof patched, a word spoken without fear. The occupation writes its scaffolding around the living. Councils meet in rooms where the lights are finally steady. The Constitution that will unroll like a new street takes shape in debates between men who once only learned the language of commands. Land changes hands. Factories turn from shells to stoves. The newspapers argue with each other in plain sight. Somewhere, a poet writes about a summer where the cicadas sounded exactly the same before and after, and how that is either the comfort or the cruelty of nature. Later, in memoirs and arguments, people will say the bomb would have ended it more quickly, or less cleanly, or with a different map, or that it saved lives by spending others. Here, the desert did not burn, and so the war ended in words and hunger and a thunder from the north. The accounting is not a ledger you balance to zero. It is a family album with pages missing and a few photographs that explain everything without saying much. Night returns to New Mexico, to a tower in a flat land where men once waited for a second sun that never rose. The sky holds its breath a little longer, then lets dawn climb it the slow, ordinary way, pale turning to blue, not with a shock, but with patience. On a kitchen table half a world away, a mother lays out bowls and steam drifts up, a soft ghost that smells like relief. In that light, the comma we followed is still small, still weightless to the hand. To the living, it weighs exactly as much as a future,